The lonely lumberjack heard the pregnant girl, screaming by the river every night. The screaming always started at midnight. For 3 weeks, Marcus Thornfield had been jolted awake by the same terrifying sound echoing across the Cascade Mountains of Oregon Territory. It was autumn of 1879, and the dense forests that surrounded his isolated lumber camp were filled with all manner of wild sounds: wolves howling, bears grunting, owls calling through the darkness. But this was different. This was unmistakably human, and it was unmistakably the cry of a woman in agony. Marcus had worked these mountains for 8 years, building his modest lumber operation from nothing more than an axe, a mule, and the kind of determination that only came from having nowhere else to go. At 36, he was a man carved from the same hard timber he harvested, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that bore the permanent scars of saw blades and falling branches. His dark hair had begun showing threads of silver, and deep lines around his gray eyes spoke of long days under the forest canopy and longer nights spent alone. The isolation had never bothered him before. After losing his wife and unborn child to fever back in Ohio, Marcus had welcomed the solitude of the Oregon wilderness. The endless work, the physical exhaustion, the blessed silence of empty mountains. It had been exactly what he needed to forget the life that had been torn away from him. But these screams were destroying that carefully constructed peace. They came from somewhere near the Santiam River, which wound through the valley below his camp like a silver serpent. The sound would start low, almost like a moan carried on the wind, then build to a crescendo of pure terror and pain before cutting off abruptly, leaving only the normal sounds of the forest night. Marcus had investigated during daylight hours, following game trails and deer paths down to the riverbank, but he never found anything unusual. No signs of struggle, no evidence of human presence, nothing to explain the horrific sounds that haunted his sleep. On the 22nd night, something changed. The screaming came earlier than usual, starting just after sunset while Marcus was finishing his evening meal. But more importantly, it seemed closer, much closer than before. Close enough that he could hear something that made his blood run cold. Words. Fragments of desperate pleas carried on the autumn air, spoken in what sounded like a mixture of English and something else, perhaps Spanish or one of the local tribal languages. The voice was young, female, and filled with a terror so profound that it made Marcus's chest tighten with sympathetic pain. "Please, help me, my baby." The words were barely audible, distorted by distance and the girl's obvious distress, but they cut through Marcus like a blade. Someone was in genuine trouble down by the river, someone who needed help desperately. Marcus grabbed his rifle and a lantern, then set off through the forest with the grim determination of a man who had failed to save someone precious once before and refused to let it happen again. The path down to the river was treacherous in the darkness, winding between massive Douglas firs and over fallen logs that could break a man's leg if he stepped wrong. Marcus moved carefully but steadily, guided by the intermittent screams that continued to echo through the trees. As he drew closer to the water, the screams became clearer, more distinct. They were definitely coming from a young woman, and she was definitely in some kind of medical distress. But there was something else in her voice. Not just pain, but fear. The kind of fear that came from being hunted. Marcus emerged from the tree line onto a narrow beach of smooth river rocks, his lantern casting dancing shadows across the water. The screaming had stopped, but he could hear other sounds now. Rapid breathing, quiet sobbing, and what sounded like whispered prayers in a language he didn't recognize. "Hello?" he called softly, not wanting to frighten whoever was hiding in the darkness. "I heard you calling for help. I'm here to help you." Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then a voice replied from somewhere upstream, trembling with fear and exhaustion. "Who are you? Are you alone?" The voice was young, probably no more than 18 or 19, with a slight accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. But what struck him most was the desperate hope mixed with terror in her tone. "My name is Marcus Thornfield. I run a lumber camp about a mile upstream. I've been hearing you crying for help for weeks now. Are you hurt?" Another pause, then the sound of movement in the brush along the riverbank. Marcus raised his lantern higher, trying to peer through the darkness without being threatening. "I'm pregnant," the voice said finally. Something's wrong. The baby. I think the baby is coming too early. Marcus felt his heart clench with familiar pain. The memory of his own wife's struggles during her difficult pregnancy came rushing back, along with the helpless feeling of watching someone he loved suffer while being unable to help. "Where are you?" he asked gently. "I can't see you. I'm scared. What if you're one of them? What if they sent you to find me?" The fear in her voice was palpable, and Marcus realized that whoever this girl was, she was running from something or someone. The isolation of her location, the terror in her voice when she heard him approaching, it all suggested that she was hiding. "I don't know who they are," Marcus said truthfully, "but I promise you, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because I heard someone in pain, and I couldn't ignore it." Slowly, carefully, a figure emerged from the shadows about 20 yards upstream. In the flickering light of his lantern, Marcus could see a young woman, barely more than a girl really, struggling to walk along the rocky shoreline. Even in the poor light, he could see that she was heavily pregnant and in obvious distress. She was also clearly not white. Her long dark hair and olive skin suggested she might be Mexican, or perhaps from one of the local Native American tribes. Her clothes were torn and dirty, as if she had been living rough for some time. "Please," she gasped, one hand pressed to her swollen belly. "Something's wrong with the baby. I've been having pains for days, but tonight they're getting worse." Marcus moved toward her slowly, keeping his rifle lowered and his movements non-threatening. As he got closer, he could see that she was even younger than he'd initially thought, probably no more than 17. Her face was pale with pain and exhaustion, and her dark eyes held the haunted look of someone who had seen too much suffering. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Isabella," she whispered. "Isabella Morales." "Well, Isabella, we need to get you somewhere warm and safe so I can help you. Can you walk a little farther?" She nodded, though Marcus could see the effort it cost her. As they made their way slowly back toward his camp, Isabella told him fragments of her story between contractions that were clearly becoming more frequent and more intense. She was from a Mexican family that had been living peacefully in the Oregon Territory for several years, working as farm laborers for various homesteaders. But 3 months ago, her father had gotten into a dispute with their employer over wages. The confrontation had escalated, and her father had been killed in what the local sheriff called self-defense. But what Isabella knew was cold-blooded murder. "They wanted our land," she explained as they paused for her to rest against a tree. "We had been saving money to buy our own farm, and they knew it. So they killed Papa and said Mama and I had to leave or they would kill us too." But Isabella had been 5 months pregnant, and traveling was difficult. She and her mother had tried to find help in town, but the same men who had killed her father had influence there. Doors that might have opened to help a pregnant girl remained firmly closed when those men made their opposition known. "What happened to your mother?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Isabella's face crumpled with grief. "They came to the camp where we were hiding. Mama tried to fight them off, tried to give me time to run. But there were too many of them." She didn't need to say more. Marcus could fill in the terrible details himself. This young woman had lost her father, her mother, and probably her home, all while carrying a child. And now she was alone in the wilderness, about to give birth with no one to help her. "The baby's father?" Marcus asked gently. "Gone," Isabella said simply. "He was a good man, but his family didn't approve of our relationship. When they found out I was pregnant, they sent him away. I haven't seen him since." By the time they reached Marcus's camp, Isabella was having contractions every few minutes. Marcus helped her into his small cabin, which was sparse but clean and warm. He had built it himself from local timber, with a stone fireplace and simple furnishings that spoke of a man who valued function over comfort. "I don't know anything about delivering babies," Marcus admitted as he helped Isabella onto his bed. "But I've helped with livestock births, and I know we need to keep you warm and comfortable." Isabella managed a weak smile despite her pain. "I don't know anything about it either. I was hoping my mother would be there to help me." The next several hours were among the most challenging of Marcus's life. Isabella's labor was difficult and prolonged, complicated by her youth, her recent trauma, and the fact that the baby seemed to be coming early. Marcus did what he could to help, boiling water, providing clean cloths, and offering what comfort he could to a young woman facing one of life's greatest challenges completely alone. "Tell me about your family," he said during one of the calmer moments, trying to distract her from the pain. "What were they like?" Isabella's face softened as she spoke about her parents. Her father had been a gentleman who loved to sing while he worked, who had taught her to read and write in both Spanish and English. Her mother had been a skilled seamstress who dreamed of opening her own shop someday, who had filled their small home with laughter and the smell of fresh tortillas. "They would have loved this baby," Isabella said, tears mixing with sweat on her face. "Papa always said children were the greatest blessing God could give." Marcus felt his own eyes burning with unshed tears. This young woman had lost everything: family, home, security, but she still spoke of her unborn child with love and hope. Her strength humbled him. As dawn broke over the mountains, Isabella's labor intensified. Marcus found himself drawing on memories of his wife's pregnancy, remembering the things the midwife had done, the encouragement she had offered. But mostly he just held Isabella's hand and told her she was brave, that she was strong, that everything would be all right. The baby finally arrived just as the sun was painting the forest in shades of gold and amber. It was a girl, tiny, but perfectly formed, with a powerful set of lungs that announced her arrival to the entire mountain. Marcus wrapped the infant in clean cloth and placed her in her mother's arms, feeling a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and something else, a joy he hadn't experienced since before his own losses. "She's beautiful," he said softly, looking down at mother and child. Isabella was crying, but they were tears of happiness now rather than pain. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us both." But even as Marcus shared in her joy, he knew their challenges were far from over. Isabella was still weak from the difficult birth. The baby was premature and would need careful attention. And somewhere out there were the men who had killed Isabella's family and would probably kill her too if they found her. "What will you name her?" Marcus asked. Isabella looked down at her daughter's tiny face, thinking carefully. "Hope," she said finally. "Her name will be Hope, because that's what she represents. Hope for a better future." Over the following days, Marcus found himself thrust into the unfamiliar role of protector and caretaker. Isabella was slow to recover from the birth, and baby Hope required constant attention. Marcus had never been around infants before, but he learned quickly, driven by a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. Isabella proved to be remarkably resilient, despite her youth and recent trauma. She had an inner strength that reminded Marcus of his late wife, and a determination to survive that was inspiring. As she regained her physical strength, she began to help around the cabin, cooking meals and tending to household tasks, with a skill that spoke of good upbringing. "You don't have to do that," Marcus told her one morning, as she prepared breakfast, while baby Hope slept in a makeshift cradle he had built from pine boards. "I want to earn my keep," Isabella replied. "You've already done so much for us. I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden," Marcus said firmly. "You're a guest in my home, and you'll be treated as such for as long as you need to stay." But they both knew that eventually, decisions would have to be made. Isabella couldn't hide in his cabin forever, and the men who had killed her family would eventually expand their search. They needed a more permanent solution. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks after Hope's birth, Marcus was working in the forest when he heard the sound of approaching horses. His blood chilled as he counted at least 4 riders making their way up the mountain trail toward his camp. He dropped his axe and ran back toward the cabin, his heart pounding with fear for Isabella and the baby. He found Isabella already hiding in the root cellar beneath the cabin floor, baby Hope held tightly against her chest. Her face was pale with terror, and Marcus could see that she recognized the voices they could hear outside. "Stay hidden," he whispered, then stepped outside to meet the visitors. 4 men sat on horseback in front of his cabin, all of them armed and wearing the kind of clothes that spoke of prosperity and influence. The leader was a man Marcus recognized from his occasional trips to town, Judge Harrison Webb, a politician who owned extensive property in the valley and had a reputation for ruthless business practices. "Mr. Thornfield," Webb said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "Judge Webb, what brings you all the way up here?" Webb dismounted, his 3 companions remaining in their saddles with their hands near their weapons. We're looking for someone. A Mexican girl who's been causing trouble in our area. Young, pregnant, goes by the name Isabella Morales. Marcus kept his expression neutral, despite the fear clawing at his chest. Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description. It's pretty isolated up here. Indeed it is. The thing is, Mr. Thornfield, we have reliable information that she was seen heading in this direction. And we know she recently gave birth, which means she can't have traveled very far. The casual way Webb spoke about tracking a young mother made Marcus's blood boil, but he forced himself to remain calm. What exactly has this girl done that has you so interested in finding her? Webb's smile turned predatory. She's a witness to certain incidents that could be misinterpreted if she were to speak to the wrong people. We simply want to ensure that doesn't happen. The threat was clear. They weren't looking for Isabella to ask her questions. They were looking for her to silence her permanently. Well, like I said, I haven't seen anyone. If I do, I'll be sure to let you know. Webb studied Marcus's face carefully, looking for any sign of deception. You know, Mr. Thornfield, you've built quite a nice operation here. It would be a shame if something were to happen to it. Fires can be so unpredictable in these dry mountains. The threat was explicit now, and Marcus felt his hand drift toward the rifle leaning against the cabin wall. But he was outnumbered and outgunned, and he had Isabella and baby Hope to think about. I appreciate the concern, Marcus said evenly, but I'm pretty careful about fire safety. Webb mounted his horse again, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. We'll be back, Mr. Thornfield, and if we find out you've been lying to us, you'll discover just how dangerous these mountains can be. As the four men rode away, Marcus waited until he was sure they were gone before letting Isabella out of the cellar. She was shaking with fear, baby Hope crying in her arms. They'll be back, she said, echoing Webb's threat. They won't stop until they find me. Marcus looked at this young woman who had already lost so much, holding her tiny daughter who represented the only hope she had left, and made a decision that would change all their lives. Then we'll have to make sure they never do, he said. That night, as Isabella nursed baby Hope by the firelight, Marcus explained his plan. They couldn't stay at the lumber camp. It was too isolated and too easy to find. But they also couldn't go to any of the nearby towns, where Webb's influence would make them easy targets. There's a settlement about 50 miles north of here, Marcus said. It's run by a group of farmers who came out from the Midwest. People who don't have any connection to the local power structure. They're good people, and they believe in helping those who need it. Isabella looked up from the baby. You would do that? Leave your business, your home, everything you've built here? Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. This place was never really home. It was just a place to hide from life. But these past few weeks, watching you and Hope, it's reminded me what life is actually for. What's that? Taking care of the people who matter. Building something that's bigger than just yourself. The journey to the northern settlement took 4 days through some of the most rugged country in the Oregon Territory. Marcus loaded essential supplies onto a pack mule, while Isabella rode his horse, baby Hope secured against her chest in a carrier Marcus had fashioned from soft leather and cloth. They traveled mostly at night, using game trails and following streams to avoid the main roads where Webb's men might be watching. It was difficult travel, especially for a woman who had given birth less than a month earlier, but Isabella endured it with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout her ordeal. On the third night, as they camped in a hidden valley beside a small creek, Isabella asked Marcus the question he had been dreading. What happens when we reach the settlement? You've given up everything to help us, but what kind of life can we really build together? Marcus had been wrestling with the same question. He cared deeply for Isabella and baby Hope, but he also knew that the difference in their ages, backgrounds, and circumstances made their situation complicated. I don't know, he admitted, but I know that whatever happens, I want to be part of your lives. Whether that's as a friend, a protector, or something more, that's up to you. Isabella was quiet for a long time, watching the firelight play across baby Hope's sleeping face. You saved our lives, she said finally. But more than that, you gave us hope when we had none. That means more to me than you'll ever know. They reached the settlement on a crisp autumn morning, when the leaves on the surrounding hills blazed with color, and the air carried the promise of winter. The community was exactly what Marcus had described, a collection of modest farms and workshops built around a central meeting hall. where families who had come west for a better life worked together to build something sustainable. The settlement's leader was a woman named Sarah Mitchell, a widow who had lost her husband during the journey west, but had continued on with her 2 children rather than turn back. She listened to their story with the kind of understanding that came from her own experiences with loss and hardship. "We've seen too many families torn apart by greed and violence," Sarah said after Marcus had finished explaining their situation. "You're welcome here, all of you, for as long as you want to stay." The months that followed brought changes that none of them could have anticipated. Marcus used his skills as a carpenter and lumberman to help expand the settlement's infrastructure, while Isabella proved invaluable as a seamstress and cook. Baby Hope thrived in the nurturing environment, surrounded by other children and families who celebrated her presence, rather than seeing her as a burden. But perhaps the most significant change was in the relationship between Marcus and Isabella. What had begun as a rescue mission slowly evolved into something deeper and more meaningful. Marcus found himself drawn to Isabella's strength and resilience, while she came to appreciate his kindness and steadfast reliability. "I never thought I'd be able to trust a man again after what happened to my family," Isabella confided to Sarah one evening as they worked together in the community garden. "Marcus is different," Sarah observed. "Some men are destroyers, but he's a builder. He sees potential where others see problems." The proposal came in the spring, almost a year after that first terrible night when Marcus had heard Isabella screaming by the river. He had built her a small house on the edge of the settlement, complete with a workshop where she could pursue her seamstress business. As he showed her the finished product, he worked up the courage to ask the question that had been in his heart for months. "Isabella, I know our circumstances haven't been conventional, but this past year, you and Hope have become the most important things in my life. Would you consider making this arrangement permanent?" Isabella looked around at the house he had built for her, at the life they had created together in this peaceful valley, at Baby Hope, playing happily in the sunshine. Then she looked at Marcus, this man who had saved them both, and asked for nothing in return, except the chance to be part of their family. "Yes," she said simply, "I would like that very much." Their wedding was held in the settlement's meeting hall on a warm June evening, with the entire community in attendance. It wasn't a grand affair by city standards, but it was filled with the kind of joy that came from people who understood the value of second chances and new beginnings. As Marcus and Isabella exchanged vows, Baby Hope, now a toddler with her mother's dark hair and bright, curious eyes, clapped her hands and laughed with delight. It was a sound that had replaced the screams that once echoed through the mountains, a symbol of hope triumphing over despair. Years later, when their family had grown to include 2 more children and Marcus had become one of the settlement's most respected leaders, Isabella would often reflect on that terrible night when she had cried out desperately beside the river. She had been calling for help in her darkest moment, and help had come in the form of a lonely lumberjack who chose compassion over convenience. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Marcus one evening as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. "Regret what? Giving up your old life, your lumber business, your solitude, everything you had built for yourself?" Marcus looked around at the thriving community they now called home, at the children whose laughter filled the air, at the woman who had transformed his existence from mere survival into genuine living. "I didn't give up anything," he said quietly. "I traded isolation for family, emptiness for purpose, survival for life. It was the best bargain I ever made." And as the evening stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus reflected on how a sound that had once terrified him, the screams of a desperate young woman, had led him to everything he had never known he wanted. Sometimes salvation came in the most unexpected forms, and sometimes the greatest blessings were born from the darkest moments. The mountains still stood tall and proud around their valley, but they no longer felt empty or threatening. They felt like guardians, protecting a community where broken people could heal and build new lives together. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, it carried not screams of despair, but the gentle sounds of families at peace. The lonely lumberjack had heard the pregnant girl screaming by the river every night, but those screams had led him to discover that he was no longer lonely, and that the greatest lumber he could ever harvest was not trees, but the building blocks of love, family, and hope.